Monitor response times are pretty broken. Of the few reviewers who actually test and measure them, they almost always use different methodologies to do so, meaning that you can't compare results between the major outlets. You can't look at, say, Hardware Unboxed review of, say, the Corsair Xeneon monitor, see that they say that the average response time is 8.6 milliseconds, but then look at TFT Central review of the same monitor, where he says that it's actually 5.9 milliseconds. And then you look at RTINGS review, which lists the rise and fall time, whatever that means, as just 4 milliseconds. Which one of those is right? Well, here's the thing. It's all of them. Before you can understand why that's the case, you need to understand what a response time even is. In short, a monitor's response time is kind of short for its pixel response time, as in how long a pixel takes to change colors. This is typically measured with different shades of grey, hence why it's often listed as G2G or G2G, or basically the grey to grey response time. What you are measuring is how long it takes for the panel to go from, say, this shade of grey to this one. Those are different RGB values. That was RGB 51 to RGB 102. And because you're generally using 8-bit colors, that means that there are 256 total different shades to choose from, going from 0 to 255. Now, the way that you measure those changes is by monitoring how much light the panel is outputting. The more light, the higher the RGB values, and vice versa. Now, it's not a straight line. On darker shades, the amount of light output between them is much smaller than when it's a brighter shade. That's called the gamma curve, and is one of the main settings that you can tweak on monitors. The typical curve is called gamma 2.2 and looks something like this. As you can see, there's less difference, there's less light output difference down at the bottom and much more up top. This will be pretty important later, but anyway, by measuring the light output over time, we get a nice graph like this. This is the same RGB 51 to 102 transition we just saw, but viewed as the light output over just 50 milliseconds. In terms of the hardware you'll need to get that sort of data, well, I'm using my open source response time tool, or OSRTT, which I've got a number of videos on already. If you're interested, I'll leave them in the cards above, but realistically, any photodetector that is suitably linear, sensitive, and fast will do fine. Plus, of course, a way to convert its output to a digital value a whole load of times per second, at least 20,000 samples per second for a good single decimal place millisecond result, although I'm running it more like 55,000 samples per second with this. Now, once you have your data, you can then graph it and measure how long the transition took. Sounds easy, right? Well, it turns out that it's about as easy as finding out how long is a piece of string, because it depends where you measure it from. You might look at this graph and say that, hey, it's obvious. It starts there and ends there. And yeah, you would be right. If we draw a line out from the sort of average of the start and average of the end, those would be, on the whole, sort of somewhat empirically, where the transition starts and ends. But what about all that noise? How do you know that it ends here and not 0.2 milliseconds earlier? What if the transition is even noisier, like this result, and it's actually even worth capturing that really slow trail-off when it's only a couple of RGB values or steps away from the final target and is virtually imperceptible to the eye? Well, probably not. Which is why we use a tolerance level. Instead of trying to find the exact point that it very first starts changing and when it finally comes to rest, you can add some sort of boundaries to the start and end and find where it crosses those and mark that as the start and end instead. The VESA standard, the traditional standard, says 10 to 90%, which puts the bounds here on that graph. That gives us the benefit of both being really easily able to ignore the noise, as well as snipping off the slow, somewhat imperceptible part of the transition that isn't overly useful to include from a buyer's perspective. Perfect! Except still not quite. The VESA standard is based on the monitor's light level. 10% plus or minus at the start and end, which is actually a pretty crazy amount to be trimming off. That snips off a significant portion of the transition, which makes it really easy for manufacturers to abuse and get insanely low figures without much, if any, bearing on reality. On top of that, if the panel overshoots badly, something I'll cover more in a sort of detail later on in this video, well, you only measure from when the light level first reaches the tolerance level, not when it sort of finally comes to rest, making it even easier for manufacturers to make pointless claims. If you think about it from an RGB perspective, 10% off of the 0 to 255 transition on either end is more like RGB 25.5 to 229.5, except that actually isn't true either. Remember that I said that the gamma curve is the sort of at lower RGB values you get less light level change and there's a whole lot more light level change at higher RGB values? Well, yeah, that applies here too. Looking at this 0 to 255 transition, 10% of the change in light level comes to around 6,000 points, let's say, meaning that our starting tolerance is just shy of 8,000, and our end light level we're looking for is about 57,000. Comparing to our gamma table, well, that's more like RGB 93 and going to RGB 243. That looks like this, and yeah, that's hardly what I would call full black to full white or anywhere near a representative test. So what do we do about that? Well, this is where the different reviewers have come up with their own solutions to solve those problems. The first thing is that most people have agreed that we should be gamma correcting the tolerance levels. As in, let's say you were to stick with that 10% tolerance, it would be based on the RGB values, not the light level. So it would be that sort of RGB, say 26 to 230, rather than the 93 to 243 you get if you're just looking at that light level difference. The main point of differentiation comes from what tolerance level to actually pick. Even with 10% of the RGB values, 26 to 230 is hardly full black to full white, although it is definitely closer than using the light level. Tim from Hardware Unboxed uses a 3% tolerance instead, meaning that on this 0 to 255 transition, it would be roughly RGB 8 to 247, which is much, much closer to what you're actually meant to be testing there. That would look like this on a graph. It's actually so close to the start that it's kind of clipping into the noise level, although it does a pretty good job at snipping off the very slow trail at the end, and so you end up with a fairly representative sample of what you'd actually see on screen with your own eyes. The only catch with that method is that the change in tolerance is based on the transition's size. Sure, at 0 to 255 the tolerance is 8 RGB steps, but at 0 to 51, well, that's only 1.53, call it 2 for ease, so the tolerance levels sit here. Basically identical to the start and end, and much less wiggle room than the 8 RGB steps you get at 0 to 255, which for reference would sit here if it was a fixed RGB 8 tolerance. On the other side, we have Simon from TFT Central, who uses or prefers a fixed RGB 10 tolerance. That means that whether it's 0 to 255 or 0 to 51 or anything else in between, he's lopping off 10 RGB values on either side. So for 0 to 255, he's measuring 10 to 245, which looks like this on that same graph. And also for 0 to 51, that would be 10 to 41, which looks like this on that graph as well. This has the benefit of keeping the tolerance levels consistent across each result, which can especially help with high noise levels, and in theory keep the measurements somewhat consistent across the full range, regardless of how large of a transition it happens to be. The catch with that method though is that all you're doing there is swapping the consistency from taking a consistent portion of the transition to a consistent tolerance regardless of the transition size. Tim's 3% method is taking the same relative amount of every transition, whereas Simon's fixed RGB10 is taking a much smaller part of smaller transitions than it does from the larger ones. That's not to say that either of them is right or wrong. Both are perfectly valid options, they just have slightly different priorities. The other thing to mention, specifically with a fixed RGB10 tolerance, is that, at least for me personally, I can generally see the difference between steps of 10 RGB. They're generally visible to my eyes. Showing me RGB 0 or RGB 10 or 20 and 30, I can just about discern a difference between the two, which I think somewhat defeats the purpose of these tolerance levels. I mean, the whole point of them is to trim off the imperceptible trail towards the end. But if I can perceive it, it's no longer all that imperceptible, right? Personally, I'm a fan of a fixed RGB 5 tolerance. I think it strikes a good balance between being generally pretty clear of most noise, while still being actually imperceptible to me, and while still being sort of tough on manufacturers. For context, here are all three of those options on that 0 to 255 graph, with the light blue being Tim's 3%, dark blue being Simon's fixed RGB 10, and orange being my fixed RGB 5. And also for some extra context, the same again shown on the 0 to 51 graph, with those again 3%, fixed RGB 5 and fixed RGB 10 tolerances. There is one other problem with this whole methodology that I'm yet to cover properly, and that's what happens when a panel overshoots. But to understand that problem, you need to understand what overshoot is, so let me explain. Overshooting is when the panel misses its target and ends up going further than it's meant to. On a graph, it looks like this, where, at least on this one in particular, while the target value, the end light level it was meant to get to, was RGB 153, it ends up peaking at more like RGB 167, or about 18% higher based on the light level alone. The same happens on falling transitions, the same sort of numbers, 153 but to 102 instead. Well, that goes all the way down to RGB 83, or about 26% lower than the target light level. The reason this happens is mostly thanks to a feature that monitors offer called overdrive. In short, what that does is the monitor increases or decreases the target that it's setting each pixel to make the physical liquid crystals in your display react and respond faster. Let's say that it's aiming for that RGB 153 sort of end light level coming from 102. That is a darker shade, so it's a rising transition. Well, it might start driving the pixel as if it wants the final light level to be RGB 200 instead. Then, after a millisecond or two, it changes the target down to 153, as in where it's meant to be. Because the pixels were rushing, trying to make a bigger change, they responded faster than if they were only going for the slightly shorter expected target. To give you some analogies there, it's kind of like if you're driving, you can either gently accelerate up to the speed limit, making sure that you never go over, at the cost of you generally taking longer to get up to that level. Or you can just mash the throttle, go as fast as you possibly can, and then try and lift off at the right point so that you don't end up going over. But let's face it, most of the time you'll mess up the timing and go at least a little bit over, if not well over. Alternatively, you can think of it like some vertical blinds, where you can carefully open them up, or just very gently slide them open, or you can rip the cord and quickly twist them open, but have them swing past where you want them to be set and sort of bounce around for a few seconds before finally coming to rest in place where they were meant to be. Generally, the difference in overdrive settings are a trade-off between a fast initial response time and overshoot, with the real top quality options reducing the weight of that trade-off by getting the timings exactly or as close as possible to being correct, so that even if it does end up overshooting a little, it doesn't end up being actually visible. But when it is visible, what you get or what you end up with is often called either inverse ghosting or coronas. No, not the family kind. Something like this. See the sort of copy of the UFO that looks like a literal white ghost? That is overshoot, where the panel tried to get to the green background, the nice flat color, but all of those pixels missed and ended up showing the same UFO again, but in much brighter and more obvious colors. So going back to the graph, to measure the traditional response times, well, even if you have a new tolerance level, you're still only taking the time that the light level first crosses that boundary, not when it finally comes to rest. And for particularly bad overshoots, that's kind of a bit of a problem, as claiming that this transition is complete here, around 2 milliseconds, well, that just clearly isn't the case. If you put the same tolerance level on top of the end as well as under it, and then pick a point where it finally reaches within that tolerance and stays there, you'll find that that transition took more like 8 milliseconds, which is a considerably different number. Measuring that way, including the overshoot time, but still using a tolerance level, is what I'm hoping to call the perceived response time. And the traditional sort of first past the post style is the initial response time. Effectively, the way I see it, you kind of have 3 options. You have the OG initial, the more encompassing perceived, and the statistically accurate complete. Many already report more than one style in at least some way or another. RTINGS lists both the rise fall time, which I think is much more like the initial response time, and the total response time, like the complete, in full. And Tim from Hardware Unboxed lists the initial fully, as in that's what the heat map is for, but also lists a sort of complete response time stat in the table below the heat maps. If nothing else, I'm hoping to effectively standardize the naming of these different sort of measurement options so that prospective buyers can know what it is they're looking at, even if no one changes literally anything else about how they test or what figures they display. Just having consistent naming would be a great help. Now, there is one new metric that you might have seen in some of my OSRTT results, the sort of third heat map. That's what I'm calling the visual response rating. It's still somewhat in development, so I'll go into a lot more detail about how it's calculated once that's sort of all sorted. But for now, I can explain what its aim is. In short, it's aiming to describe how a response actually looks to your eyes. One that's something, a monster that's fast with very little overshoots is going to score highly, whereas a response time that might be just outright slow, or that's still relatively fast but has to use a whole load of overshoot to get there, well, that's going to score poorly. And things in the middle where they're going to still be reasonably fast but a reasonably bad overshoot or sort of middling speeds, they're going to score somewhere in the middle. That's the idea anyway, but it's important to note that it is a calculated metric rather than a specific measurement sort of from the graphs. It'll be a culmination of different measurements rather than something specific. So just keep that in mind. And one final thing you should know is about the overshoot results. Now, I've already covered what overshoot is, but not how it gets reported. It's a metric that doesn't normally get included in a manufacturer's spec sheet, but is really a really important sort of piece of context for how a monitor is actually performing. Most reviewers, traditionally anyway, would quote overshoot as a percentage based on the light level. Some quote it as a percentage of based on the end light level alone. So for this 102 to 153 transition, you would quote that as 22,000 minus 19,000 divided by 19,000 and times it by 100 to make it a percentage, or that comes out to about 16%. Although some would quote it based on the transition's range. So it would still be the 22,000, the peak, minus 19,000, the end light level, but then also that's divided by 19,000 minus 10,000, or the range of the transition, and again, times by 100, which gives you about 33%. The trouble with those, of course, is the same as the response times. The light level change doesn't correspond to the gamma curve, which means it's not a very good representation of what you'll actually see as a viewer. Luckily, most reviewers have already switched to using gamma-corrected measurements, although Tim still uses a percentage, whereas Simon reports how many RGB values above or below the target that response to that transition went. While a percentage is likely easier for anyone to understand, because of its variability, it can potentially, distort how noticeable that overshoot is. Okay, that is a lot of information, I know. If you're still watching this far along, then thank you very much. I hope this helps explain a bit about monitor response times and how the other reviewers test for them. I still have a whole load of work to do on the response time tool, but I am slowly shipping out units as I build them, and between, if I'm being honest, complete mental breakdowns. So if you've already asked for one, my apologies for the delays. I am hoping to get some more out soon. Sadly, being a just non-functioning human with many other responsibilities happens to slow things down kind of a whole lot, but I am slowly getting through things and getting things kind of, well, out in people's hands, and fixing bugs, adding features, and changing a whole load of stuff. But I'm also a somewhat one-man band for this, so again, my apologies, and progress is happening, if slower than at least I would like. Now, if you would like to register your interest in getting a kit from me, then feel free to ping me an email. There's a link below that you can do that with. If you'd like to support me and this project and you don't need one of these, then you can check out the links in the description below. You can become a YouTube member if you like, or just hit the subscribe button. And if you want to check out the other videos about OSRTT, like the hardware, the user guide if you're picking one up, then feel free to check out the videos in the end cards or in the cards above when either of them pop up. And yeah, that's kind of that really. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, things that I got wrong, or any suggestions, feel free to leave those in the comments down below. And yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.